Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Beneath the Surface lecture with Marine Mammal Care Center, sponsored by Marathon. Today, we're lucky enough to be joined by Jessica Fujii, who's with Monterey Bay Aquarium, and she is a sea otter expert who's going to tell us all about her work with Monterey Bay Aquarium and the work that they do with sea otters. To introduce Jessica, Jessica is the Sea Otter Program Manager and Principal Investigator at Monterey Bay Aquarium. She studied sea otters in California, British Columbia, and Alaska over the past 15 years. She receives her master's in ecology and evolutionary biology from UC Santa Cruz, go Slugs, with a focus on behavioral ecology. And it's a real pleasure to get a chance to speak with you for our second in a series on sea otters. Jessica, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Dave, and thank you all for joining today. While I start sharing my screen, I'd actually love it if people wanted to put in the chat their favorite fact about sea otters. If you joined last week and heard Andy's talk, maybe something you learned or just something you've heard from other opportunities. All right. So yeah, as Dave said, I'm going to be talking to you guys about our sea otter rehabilitation and conservation research work that we do at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. As Dave said, Andy Johnson of Defenders of Wildlife gave a talk last week, gave a lot of great information, doing a deep dive of what makes sea otters special and their history. So I might be touching on those things a little bit, but I'm going to be going much deeper into what we do at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So to just give a quick overview, I'm going to be talking about the history of our program, how it's changed over the last 38 years, as we've learned more about how best to care for these sea otters and how to best help them, our goals overall with our program and then at the aquarium overall. Give you a closer in-depth look at how we help some of these stranded sea otters, lots of fun videos of fluffy young sea otters to watch, as well as some of the future directions that we're hoping to go with our program in the near future. So our rehabilitation work really started in the early 80s, before the aquarium even opened its doors. Because of our location on the Monterey Peninsula, pups were stranding, there was this clear need. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium stepped up. This started with just learning how to care for pups at this young age. And most of these animals went on to live either at the Monterey Bay Aquarium or other facilities. There was a lot of human care, kiddie pools, water beds, kind of whatever they could make work to take care of these animals. That then evolved into how can we raise these animals in order to release them back to the wild, and trying to have humans act as those moms, teaching these pups how to dive, how to find food, how to just survive in the wild. And while we had some success, it was pretty clear that humans are not the best sea otter moms, not the best teachers. We had some issues with sea otters becoming used to humans as a source of food. And so when we tried to release them back to the wild, they were still reaching out to people to see if they could, get a snack, which was not what we wanted. And it was not in the best interest of the animals either. So from there, in the early 2000s, we switched to this idea of using surrogacy for these pups that stranded, as well as for any older animals when they stranded, doing this more hands-off approach. So this includes wearing a disguise, food is not coming directly from a human, all these ways to create this barrier between otters and humans. And this would not be possible without our veterinary care team, who have an amazing job at being able to care of animals of all different stages with different health problems. and have really advanced our knowledge of veterinary care for sea otters, as well as through collaborative research, our understanding of the physiology of sea otters. And then we also have our resident sea otters who, when they're on exhibit, they are acting as ambassadors for their species, for ocean conservation, and working with their trainers. And then when they go behind the scenes, they'll still be working, and they act as those surrogate moms, continuing to help those animals be released and help the population. So that is all happening, behind the scenes or even in front of the scenes at the aquarium. Offsite, we're also doing collaborative research on the wild population to understand their ecology, a lot of knowledge about their basic natural history, as well as the status of the population, threats that they're facing, and what we can do to help. Broader at the aquarium, we also do a lot of work with policy and outreach to promote policies that will help protect the ocean or otters directly, as well as outreach, which can be day to day, lots of visitors coming to the aquarium, as well as more national or international outreach through these larger events. In this photo here is one we did a few years ago called Big Blue Live, which was to get everyone tuning in, really excited just about the ocean, about all the amazing wildlife we have in Monterey Bay. And all of these are in this broader goal of the aquariums to protect and restore California coastal ecosystems and wildlife. And sea otters fall under that, and they do still need help for that population to recover in California. Sea otters are still threatened under the Endangered Species Act and on that list. And that has been true for many decades now. So threatened is a step above being considered endangered on that endangered species list. But even if they were to no longer be listed as threatened, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have fully recovered. So this figure shows the count of sea otters since 1985. And you can see it's increased very slowly over the last several decades, but it has been increasing overall with a few dips. In order to be considered to be delisted from this list, they would need to reach 3,090 individuals for over 3 years. And you can see we hit that very briefly, but then the population went down again. So we didn't quite get there. The numbers did bounce back a little bit, but they're still just a little shy of that threshold. But again, even if they were to reach that number, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will also still consider whether there are other threats that are too large to really consider removing the sea otters from this list. And one of those threats also includes the range that they're occupying, and threats to things like a large oil spill or other predators. So this shows the current range of sea otters just north of Santa Cruz, down south past Point Conception towards Gaviota. And you can see it's this really narrow band that sea otters occupy. Based on their ability to dive, they are a very near-shore animal. And along California, this is a very linear coastline that we have. So that range expansion, which really started in Big Sur and went north and south, has been slow in part because of the coastline that we have and the ability of sea otters to move between these areas. But this has not increased really in the last 20 years. And some of these areas you'll see are a darker red color, while others are a lighter yellow, particularly in those darker areas. It's really that area supporting as many sea otters as it can, based on food availability and other resources. So for us to really see that population increase, we would want to see this population expanding. So for years, a lot of research went into why that wasn't happening. Were sea otters not reproducing enough? Was it disease? And particularly in that north and south ends, what we really think is happening is there are a lot of white sharks in that area. There's some rookeries in that area as well. And that's almost become this physical barricade that sea otters are having a really difficult time getting past. And that is probably really stopping that natural range expansion that we would have expected to see. So we're also wanting to protect sea otters, not just because of their population numbers and they need it. It's not just because, otters are often people's favorite animal. It's also the value that they have to the ecosystems they live in. This is often seen or talked about with kelp forests and seagrass beds. Sea otters are known as the keystone species. So by being a top predator, they are having these profound impacts on these ecosystems that they live in through the web food that they live in. So by eating their food, that is having this top-down effect on these algae and seagrasses. So these ones are often the most well-known. Kelp forests in particular, that's been seen throughout their entire range, including in Alaska and British Columbia. But there's also some less visible impacts that sea otters have on their ecosystem and the benefits that they have to that. So a recent paper also found that these calcareous reefs, these algae in Alaska, had become more exposed to ocean warming, ocean acidification, and overgrazing because those kelp forests had been decimated because the sea otters were not present. This was also seen in a different way with the seagrass in British Columbia. They found that the seagrasses where sea otters were foraging were actually more genetically diverse. And that was because as sea otters were digging in amongst the grass to try and get those clams, that was actually causing the seagrass to reproduce sexually instead of asexually, and it had more genetic diversity to do that. And that's going to help moving forward with climate change and other ecosystem changes for those seagrass beds to respond by having that higher genetic diversity. And we're still learning a lot about these ecosystem impacts that sea otters have. Those last two studies that I just referenced were in the last few years. This figure is from a study that came out last year that I was a co-author on with Josh Smith at UC Santa Cruz. And things have been pretty steady along the Monterey Peninsula for a very long time. And then 2013, we had sea star wasting disease that happened all along the West Coast. And everywhere, including Monterey Peninsula, we saw these changes in urchin abundance, in kelp abundance, and even sea otter abundance in response to all of that. And basically found that sea otters were helping maintain patches of kelp. They weren't able to stop urchin barrens from forming at all, like many expected. But by focusing on urchins that were still in kelp, they were able to create a little bit more resiliency. So some of those patches still remained, which will help facilitate recovery, is what we hope. And we're still doing research on to see how exactly that will happen. So just going to be going in a little bit more about what specifically at the Monterey Bay Aquarium we do to monitor threats, to do that rescue, rehabilitation, and release, and to do some of that research. So for our stranding response, we work with our partners. Our permit is through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which manages all sea otters. And then we also work with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito for stranding response. As you'll see in the next few slides, sea otters can strand anywhere along that range. And so to really promote their fast response and bringing them to a facility that can help them, we really need to work with our partners. So since 1984, when the Monterey Bay Aquarium started rescuing sea otters, we have brought over 900 otters back to the aquarium. This has increased over time. And you can see there's some years where there's spikes, and they'll kind of normalize again and then go up. But overall, we have been seeing an increase, and this includes a lot of pups, but will also help older animals as well that may come in for a variety of reasons. And you can see, this highest peak we had was in 2017, which was also around that peak that we saw in the range-wide numbers. In part, there just seemed to be a lot more otters around, so there were more stranding. And we can also, by monitoring these trends, not only in total numbers, but also where the strandings are occurring, that can tell us different things about the population. So some areas we're seeing higher growth, so those strandings were increasing at a much faster rate, whereas other areas have been pretty steady over the last decade or so. When we respond to these strandings, we also get information about the causes of stranding. So many of these are similar that other marine mammals face as risks to their survival. This includes white sharks. However, unlike most other marine mammals that are susceptible to white shark bites, sea otters are actually not a good source of food for them. So they're often just taking a bite, seeing if that otter is food, realizing it's mostly fur, and so moving on, but the otter will often still die from those injuries. There's also different diseases. This is a microscope shot of Toxoplasmosis gondii, which is a parasite that's actually traditionally considered a terrestrial parasite, but because sea otters live in that nearshore environment and runoff, they can get it as well. There's also toxins like domoic acid and pseudonychia, which is naturally occurring in the marine environment, but we'll get these large blooms, and those may actually be increasing in frequency and how intense those blooms are as well. So that is impacting sea otters. Thankfully, this has been decreasing, but we do still see injuries and causes of strandings related to things that humans have done. This can be entanglement with fishing line, being struck by a boat, or on occasion, people who didn't like sea otters and purposely tried to hurt them. We also have cases of sea otters that are just really struggling to survive. In this photo, you can make out the rib cage of the sea otter. She was an adult female and had just weaned her pup, and all that work to take care of the pup and herself, find enough food, was just a huge strain, and she was losing what little fat reserve she did have. So this is often known as enlactation syndrome, where we will see these adult females that are just really weak and really just need a little bit of care and extra food to get healthy again. And then we have pups. Oftentimes these pups are stranded for a reason we don't know for sure. It could be any of these other reasons happened to the mom, and so she had to abandon the pup. Other times we will see pups getting stranded during large storms. They're too young to really swim, and with the large swell, they get separated from their mom and end up washing ashore. And so that is the group I'm going to focus on a little bit more in the next few slides and talk about how we take care of them and how we're able to get them back to the wild. So this is, like I mentioned earlier, through our surrogacy program, where we pair these orphan pups with one of our resident female sea otters, where they'll bond with the sea otter mom, learn all the different skills that they really need for survival. And our resident females are amazing that you might take a little bit of time, but they will bond and take care of this pup as if it's their own. They'll be protective. groom it, and really just treat it like it's their own. So our surrogacy program is broken into really 5 stages. And at each of these stages, we're providing different levels of care, ultimately to get them to that stage of release. So the first stage is stranding. We get calls from the general public. Sea otter pups are really good at being loud. They have a really high-pitched squeak, a little cry, and they'll be noticeable by the public. So we will get a call, or our partners will, and we will go and try to find the pup. If possible, we will try to reunite the pup back with its mom in the wild. Whenever possible, that is the best solution. But oftentimes the mom can't be found, or we're not in a good location where it can actually be safely attempted. If that's not possible, we will work with our partners, or if it's local, with our own stranding response team to bring those animals back to the aquarium and make sure that they're otherwise healthy and doing okay. And as you can see in this map, these strandings do happen pretty much throughout the entire range. Okay, so hope you're ready for a fluffy sea otter. So some of our sea otters, these pups, when they come in, are only a day old. And so they have this really fluffy, extra dense coat of fur, even denser than their moms have. And they need that in the wild to survive. It helps them float, keeps them warm in that really cold environment. But it's also a lot of work. So at this age, these pups are too young to be placed with one of our female sea otters. So humans are providing care. As you can see, this person's wearing that disguise so that the otters don't habituate to them, and then making sure their coat is getting dry, getting clean all the way down. It's actually really easy if that fur gets matted for these cold spots to form. So trying to groom all over. We're also nursing these pups by bottle feeding them. Once they get a little bit older, this is that same otter, just a few weeks older. You can see his coat is looking a little bit more like an adult's fur coat, and he's ready to start learning how to eat solid food and how to, be positioned correctly in order to eat it, just like a mom would be making him do in the wild. Also getting him used to what a hard shell feels like, all these things that he would have been experiencing in the wild. Struggles a little bit at first, but does get the hang of it. And then you'll also start to see, as he's playing with these shells, he's also trying to dive. And so one of the milestones we're really looking for before we introduce them to their mother is that ability to dive down to the bottom of the tank and pick up solid food and eat it on their own. So he is now ready. So he is going to be introduced to Rosa. Rosa has been a surrogate mom with us for many years. She has raised 15 pups. And so in this video, you're seeing a compilation of introductions with her and that same male pup. And at first, they're a little skittish, a little unsure about each other. But eventually, you'll see that they're much more comfortable, and the pup will actually be swimming on mom's chest. And that is a great sign that they're comfortable with each other, that they're bonding together. And they will continue to stay together for 4 months once we see that bond forming. So like I said, Rosa has raised now 15 pups, and she is still at the aquarium, and she is enjoying retirement. She is no longer acting as a surrogate mom, but is able to be on exhibit or behind the scenes and enjoying crabs and other tasty food. So once they've bonded, she really starts teaching them skills for survival. And some of these are just by trial and error, the pup following the mom around and following what she does. The mom will groom the pup and make sure that the coat condition is looking good. They'll learn how to open hard-shelled prey, cracking open clams, how to get at the meat of a crab without getting pinched by the claws. All very important skills, as well as socialization. So they'll be in that tank with other animals of different ages and learn to interact with each other. Once they reach about 6 months of age, which is when we typically see pups get weaned naturally in the wild, we'll separate the pup from its mother, and they'll be held in a tank, with those other animals, so they still get that socialization. They're still practicing how to open up all those different food items without any help from mom. So that's called their weaning. So after that time period, as they're getting those skills, we're also getting them ready for release. We'll give them tags on their hind flippers and a radio transmitter. And then once everyone is ready, we have good weather, we'll go out to the release site, open up that kennel door, and the otter will jump right out into the ocean. Doesn't stop there. We keep following these animals to make sure that they are making that transition to the wild successfully. So to do that, we're looking for those tags, we're listening for the signal from the radio transmitter, and we're going out and following them every day for 2 weeks. We'll be checking how far they're traveling, which tells us how much energy they're spending. Are they successfully finding food? Are they showing any signs of stress? And is based on their body condition, can we visually tell if they look healthy enough? If they're not, we'll recapture them, bring them back to the aquarium, get them healthy again, and then try again. And what we've learned over the past 20 plus years is every release is different. So this map shows each color is a different sea otter release, and they were all released in the same location in Elkhorn Slough. One went really far north pretty much immediately. One explored inside the bay a little bit, and another one stayed right in Elkhorn Slough. So every time we release an animal, we never quite know where we're going to end up. So by doing this for the last 20 years now, we have seen great success. When we first started, we were focused in Elkhorn Slough, which is an estuary north of the Monterey Bay Aquarium within the Monterey Bay. And in that 15-year period where we were focused in the estuary, we successfully released 37 pups that had been surrogate reared. These otters went on to survive just like similar aged animals in that same area, as well as reproduce. So this photo is of Otter 501, who you might know. She's famous. She was on PBS. She had her own documentary, and she went on and reproduced for many years on as well in Elkhorn Slough. And so in Elkhorn Slough in 2002, when we started those releases, there were about 20 sea otters. In that time period, it increased to over 140. And based on modeling that we've done, we were able to show that over half of that population growth rate could be attributed to not only the otters that we put there, as well as their descendants through that survival and reproduction. And as you saw earlier in that map where these animals came from throughout that entire range, the fact that we were able to put them in this one location and most of them stayed there was also really encouraging that this was a strategy that would work. Now, as we mentioned, the ecosystem impacts of sea otters. This is where we learned about that first hint about the sea otters and seagrass system. When we started releasing sea otters there, we did not know this. We didn't even think that this would happen. It's a little bit more of a complex chain through the food web that has these positive impacts. But by having more sea otters, we had fewer crabs, we had more sea slugs who were grazing on that algal film that was attached to the eelgrass, which made the eelgrass healthier and be able to be more abundant. So that was a really nice surprise. We were so excited when Brent Hughes, who led that first study, was able to find these results and really brought home the fact that sea otters did used to live in these estuary environments, even though in the past, many people thought of them as a kelp forest marine animal. So as for today, we are continuing our releases in other locations. In some ways, we did such a good job in Elkhorn Slough. We put ourselves out of a release site because it was reaching those high numbers that wasn't able to really support us to continue releasing sea otters in there. So we have done some releases in Morro Bay, another estuary a little bit further south, another area that saw significant eelgrass loss, and there are groups down there also trying to do restoration activities. So maybe by having some more otters down there, that will also help. And then we're also doing releases right outside the aquarium along the Monterey Peninsula. This is a little bit more challenging, being a more open coast environment. But as we've seen with those sea stars and the sea urchins, might have some positive impacts as there. And also it just really helps us do our strategies work in this different environment. So both of these are still ongoing, still learning more about it, but they're also still within the current range of the sea otter population. And so as we're moving forward, we're really taking a step back and looking at some of those bigger pictures. So as we mentioned before, in orange is the current sea otter range. And that is really just a small percentage of what their historical range used to be, going as far south, into Baja California, and then north into Oregon. There are northern sea otters, a different subspecies in Washington, and then through archaeological research and genetic studies, there's some question of really what type of sea otter was in Oregon. Was it more like a northern sea otter or more like the southern sea otter we have in California? But even within California, there's this huge stretch of coastline that no longer has sea otters that used to. And so they are not necessarily benefiting from the potential ecosystem impacts sea otters can have. And this may have been seen recently with the drastic loss of kelp that has been reported in Northern California. So looking forward with federal, state, and many other stakeholders, there's been a lot of work to explore the feasibility of reintroducing sea otters to these different historical range areas. And one proposal is to use these surrogacy methods to release otters into those locations, as opposed to doing the more traditional translocation that has been used in the past, which was to capture wild sea otters and move them to a new location. As we saw in Elkhorn Slough, we were able to put animals in the estuary, regardless of where they came from, because they were so young, they didn't have that same site fidelity, that same homing to go back to what they were used to. So that could be a strategy that works if this were to move forward. In order to do that, we would really need to build our capacity. We typically release about 3 to 4 surrogate reared sea otters each year. And we really do expect that if this were to be successful, we would need more than that. So we are looking to increase that capacity through partnerships with other aquariums, teach them how we do our surrogacy methods, use their females that they have on exhibit, and when they're behind the scenes, have them act as surrogate moms as well before coming back to the aquarium for release. And then lastly, we're going to continue doing research, really improve our understanding of the role of sea otters in these different ecosystems, maybe more of those less visible changes that may not be as obvious at first glance, and how they might continue to change with climate change. We've also seen things like the range of white sharks are also changing, so how all those things will interplay together. And so just to end, different ways that anyone can help. There's really, voting in support of protecting our oceans, ways to fight climate change and reduce our impact. Also being a good wildlife steward, no matter where you live, if you're out really respecting the wildlife, not disturbing them. As much as it seems like sea otters are just really loving life, sleeping in the sun in the kelp all day, they do have to work really hard to get all of that food that they need, as well as other threats that they're facing. So anything that people can do to not disturb them can actually have a really big impact. And then also, for those who are able, donations, other support through volunteering. We are actually really heavily depend on our volunteers at the aquarium and in our sea otter program. It's a lot of hard work, but also a lot of benefits. People really enjoy doing that. And also just getting the word out that sea otters are more than just a cute furry face. They're really important to our ecosystems, and that by having those healthy ecosystems, that's really going to help as we continue to have changing environments that are also impacting humans. And so with that, I'd like to thank the Marine Mammal Care Center for inviting me, and all of you guys for listening in, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was amazing. So I would invite anybody right now, if you have any questions for Jessica, you can go ahead and add those to the chat if you'd like, or you feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask those questions directly as well. And while people are gathering their questions, before we started the lecture today, we were talking a little bit about your background, how you ended up in the position that you're in today. Can you share with people a little bit about your journey to get to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. I'll actually probably even take it a little bit further. I grew up in the Bay Area, going to the Monterey Bay Aquarium as a young girl, and loved what they did, wanted to be a marine biologist. So when I was going to school at UC Santa Cruz, I started volunteering, tracking sea otters. Part of that monitoring, looking at what they're eating, where they're going, was really how I started my journey with the aquarium, was as a volunteer.
Very cool. I think a lot of us in the professions that we're in started off as volunteers, and it's great advice, especially when we're in high school, in college, with that opportunity to make it part of our educational experience. I think the first job that I got, I had 0 paid positions on it. It was all volunteers and supporting research at university.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a question in the chat. Do you know what's going on with the sea stars, with the sunflower stars? Are they starting to come back?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different groups monitoring, both sunflower stars and the ochre sea star. Both of them, were hit really hard with the sea star wasting disease. I know they've been starting to see the ochre star come back, but not so much the sunflower star. That one has still been really difficult to find in the wild. And, I know there's different groups that are trying to find different ways to raise them, at an aquarium, and then release them, kind of like what we do with rehabilitating marine mammals, is trying to get these sea stars back to the wild as well, as we're learning more about the important role they play as well.
I know here in Southern California, starting to see more ochre stars, all about 6 inches across, seemingly just the size that it took to get from the wasting disease where they all passed on, and just now starting to get back to some significant sizes. But we are seeing them, which is nice, in some spaces, but still not quite as prevalent as they used to be. So if you're not familiar, we're mentioning a sea star wasting disease that happened. Do you remember what year that happened?
I know around here we saw it really start in 2013. That's when it started becoming noticeable. So
right around the same time as the blob was happening off our coast here, and pretty much all of the sunflower stars and all of the Pisaster stars, including the ochre stars, knobby stars, short spine stars, all passed on because of this wasting disease. And there are some small pockets of spaces where it wasn't as impacted. So maybe there's some founder populations that are helping out. Perhaps maybe that's the issue with sunflower stars. Maybe those pockets didn't exist for them. But it's a really interesting and sort of tragic thing that happened off the coast. Interesting that it happened in the aquariums as well. So at the same time that they're wasting offshore, they were wasting inside of aquariums as well.
Yeah, our aquarium in particular, not everyone has this ability, but we're right on the coastline and we're pulling in water from the bay for our tanks. So yeah, it got in and it was getting all the different sea stars, as well as some of our sea urchins. They're both part of the echinoderms, and so we were seeing it in the sea urchins as well, which was a little unexpected at first.
Yeah, there are wasting disease that happen with, like wasting disease with echinoderms is sort of a thing that happens. But this one was pretty massive. Interestingly, happened at Aquarium of the Pacific, which is a closed system too. We had another question. Is there a general age that you match the pups with the surrogate moms?
Yeah, so it's mostly based on their shedding of that pup coat and that ability to dive and eat solid food. So typically that means that we're pairing the pups with their surrogate mom when they're between 8 and 10 weeks of age.
Okay. And a follow-on question. When you attach a radio communication device, how do you attach it and how long do they work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the flipper tags go on to their hind flippers. They don't transmit any data. It's just for visual identification. So they're actually the same type of tags that they'll put on cattle on their ears. And so that's just a hole punch that we put in between the webbing of the otter's flipper digits, much like an ear piercing. And those can last a day or 10 years. Really depends on the otter and how much they want to chew on that tag. And so that's part of the reason why with the transmitters, it's actually surgically implanted, in part because of their fur. You can't have anything that's compressing it so that they can't clean the fur underneath. And otters have to groom every inch of them. So if we were to try and glue something on the top of their head, it would be destroyed in a matter of minutes. So it is surgically implanted in their abdomen, and it's free floating in there.
Another question. Does Monterey Bay Aquarium use the same color tag on all of their released sea otters?
We don't. Let's see if I can grab some really quick. We use a wide variety of colors, and they get one tag on each flipper, and based on that unique color combination, we'll know exactly which individual we're looking at. So we have to use a variety of colors so we know who it is. If they were all turquoise like this, it'd be nice and visible, but we wouldn't know who that is, and we'd really want to be able to differentiate between individuals. And we're looking from shore, so reading tag numbers isn't really an option.
Yeah, we tag all of the sea lions and seals that we have at Marine Mammal Care Center with an orange tag. They all get the same color. They have a number on them, but really only legible if they end up stranding again and you have hands-on to be able to read that tag number. Or maybe if you're 20 years old, you might be able to read the tag. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking some time. It's been really fun talking to you, learning more about the program at Monterey Bay Aquarium. And yeah, thanks so much, and keep up the good work. And thank you for all you do for marine mammals off the coast here of California. Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you guys all so much. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us for another Beneath the Surface lecture series. We have a lecture coming up with Holly Fernbach with SR3, which is a research organization and a rescue organization up in Seattle. She's going to be talking to us a little bit about her work with southern resident killer whales and sort of the plight of those animals. If you don't know, southern resident killer whales are, those iconic animals that live up in the Puget Sound in the Salish Sea. J-pod, L-pod, those kinds of things, they're up there, but their population is having some trouble right now. And it's an issue that we all need to be focused on, just like sea otters and just like some of our other endangered species. We really need to have a better understanding of what's going on with southern resident killer whales. And I hope you all will join us on May 19th for that lecture as well. Oh, and we have sharing. There's a new calf in K-pod. So yes, it's really exciting to hear whenever we get another animal added to that population, which right now numbers, I think, at about 73 animals. So thanks everybody. I hope to join you again on the 19th. Thanks everybody.